give it a try and invite Dr. Debroy. We weren't sure at all that his office would respond and we would have him here. I'm only delighted that this worked out so easily. It's Dr. Debroy. We are so very indebted to you for accepting our invitation to be on with us on this day. So on behalf of all of us gathered here, I welcome Shri Debroy to this meeting and to impress upon the young minds to traverse beyond their domain of existing knowledge and reach out to others, and hence building their overall understanding of human existence. There couldn't have been a better expert on this occasion, an economist by profession and Indologist by passion. I wonder how he found time to write so much over years. I also wish to briefly express my interest on behalf of Manipal Universal Press. Dr. Debroy, a publication house of MAHE, would be interested to bring out a publication of one of your works if you ever think of publishing one more. You have so many books, so much of writing, thousands of words written down by you, maybe some more. If they are coming in, then MUP would be interested. Also with us today is a doctor by profession, but an eminent educationist by his vision, Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, our own leader, our own Vice Chancellor. Like a soldier, like a Lieutenant General, he is leading us from front when it comes to bringing the vision and the essence of NEP into action. In just over 1 year of his term, we have seen him work relentlessly towards enhancing the presence of humanities and social sciences on MAHE campus. A very, very warm welcome to our Vice Chancellor on behalf of all of us here. The day belongs to you, young students who are entering the new world of learning today. They are from philosophy, Sanskrit studies, and European studies. So 3 different programs, 3 different master programs. Interestingly, they will have a couple of courses being learned together. And this is what is important in the present context. So I welcome each one of you who has come in to attend this program and make way for the much awaited this lecture by Shri Debroy. Thank you very much for joining in.
I now invite our own Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, who is a renowned otorhinolaryngologist, ENT surgeon with an excellent academic record of accomplishment and was commissioned in Army Medical Corps. He has contributed significantly in the field of medical education and have trained generations of the Armed Forces Medical College, AFMC Pune. After serving Armed Forces Medical Services for 38 years and prior to assuming the Vice Chancellor of MAHE, he was the Vice Chancellor of Sikkim Manipal University and successfully completed his 3-year term. Under his leadership, SMU achieved the recognition as a leading private university in the country. And we are very happy that Dr. M.D. Venkatesh has accepted our humble invitation to preside over the event. Now I request Vice Chancellor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, to deliver his presidential remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Srini, and thank you, Professor Neeta and Inamdar, madam. At the outset, good afternoon to everybody. Warm greetings from Manipal Academy of Higher Education, an institution of eminence deemed to be a university. A very, very special welcome to Dr. Bibek Debroy, and also, sir, our gratitude to you for accepting our invitation to be part of today's orientation program. Extremely gracious of you. And I know your promptness in which you responded literally touched our heart. And you, having considered to be part of this program, has really been a feather in our cap at this current moment. And I'm sure both Manipal Center for European Studies and Department of Philosophy feel the same way, and they express our gratitude and sentiments in that fashion. I'm extremely happy to be part of this program where we are launching the master's program in Sanskrit Studies to be offered by our Department of Philosophy of MAHE from this academic year onwards. It's a unique situation that 3 master's programs are being, students are being inducted and the orientation is being conducted jointly. It shows the way we work to bring in interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity in all our approach towards humanities and social sciences. Manipal Academy of Higher Education, being an institution of eminence, strives towards strengthening of not merely mainstream disciplines, but also niche disciplines in liberal arts. The university remains committed not only to select knowledge domains, which could perhaps marginalize classical knowledge spectra, but also extends equal support to all knowledge domains, and therefore it has spread its presence across the country and globe. I'm extremely happy and overwhelmed that MAHE's Faculty of Liberal Arts offers a plethora of multidisciplinary academic programs through its centers of European studies, philosophy, languages, humanities, geopolitics, communications, and Gandhian studies. And I wish to see more such disciplines and programs included and coming up in the near future over the next couple of years, as we have taken upon us to implement the national education policy in its true sense. Many of these academic engagements seem to be very niche and not mainstream, but the intellectual contribution of these fields are commendable. MAHE, in its academic delivery, has structured its academic delivery into three verticals. One in health sciences, the second vertical is technology and management, and third vertical, which is now emerging as one of the leading verticals of the universities in humanities, social sciences. MAHE, in that sense, is a truly multidisciplinary university. I'm aware of the fact that today's academia concerns for the subtlety of terms and its possible connotations. So there might be a fear that the word niche could be a subaltern term. The importance of liberal arts is not solely reflected in the usage of such terms, but it is vested in their ability to serve as the foundations of intellectual societies. They participate in knowledge production and dissemination processes foregrounded in areas of theoretical and applied research of other disciplines. The global well-being and development are dependent on the intellectual progress of humankind. The intellectual progress not only is built upon scientific and technological advancement, but also comprises of the ethical efficacy, gender equity, subaltern perspectives, intercultural competence, etc., and literary sensibility, amongst others. As we look at this, one of the landmark regulations that came into existence the last year, that the National Education Policy 2020, is a true reflection of these thoughts. MAHE envisages such holistic development, which can only be met by providing excellent education. In this context, the contributions of the Indian subcontinent and Sanskrit in all fields, science, philosophy, literature, politics, and economics, is resourceful even for the times to come. It is a pioneering day for another multidisciplinary program centered on the Indian schools of thought to be launched today. I hope that this program constantly engages with the scientific, philosophical, and literary works and successfully unearths the wisdom of the past towards progressive development in the future. Further, the extending university's commitment to preserve and foster philosophical and cultural heritage of the region and nation, the department has also introduced a master's in Indian philosophy the previous year. Realizing the need of the hour, MAHE has established Dvaita Philosophy Resource Center in 2009 as part of the Manipal Center for European Studies to encourage knowledge exchange between India and Europe and other countries, thus creating an international platform of Indian knowledge systems. Today, MAHE takes pride in the fact that the center has re-established itself as an independent institution, Department of Philosophy, and is leading research in Mahabharata and digital humanities. Such has been the growth trajectory of MAHE. MAHE always begins with a center and then upgrades it to a department, and later on these departments grow into institutions. And I foresee these things happening at a very remarkable speed. Now, many of our centers and departments which are now fledging will soon become, I hope, leading institutions of humanities and social sciences in the country. On the other hand, Manipal Center for European Studies was established in 2009 with the objective to develop and broaden India and European Union relations through educational and enterprise and collaborations between universities. The center offers Masters in European Studies and Overseas Research in Higher Education, Multilingualism and Internationalization. Manipal Center for European Studies has been a recipient of many grants under the Erasmus programs of the European Union, and as a result of its sustained efforts, it was awarded with the prestigious John Monnet Chair in Economics, and later recognized as a John Monnet Center of Excellence in India-European Interdisciplinary Studies. And we are very proud of Dr. Neeta Inamdar's acceptance as a professor of Jean Monnet Chair. The three sister institutions, Manipal Center of European Studies, Department of Philosophy, and Department of Languages, have developed in close association and represents MAHE's vision of excellence in education, research, and internationalization. Their initiatives complement the newly introduced National Education Policy, NEP 2020, as it emphasizes on the revival of the Indian traditional liberal arts and proposes a multidisciplinary approach to education and research. These three institutions, Manipal Center for European Studies, Department of Philosophy, and Department of Languages, is ably led by three of these scholars, Jean Monnet Professor Neeta Inamdar, Dr. Srini, and Professor Putti. It's also very happy to inform Professor Debroy and others that MAHE has taken implementation of National Education Policy 2020 as a prime important focus. And over the last 8 months, we worked very hard and we have come out with a blueprint for how are we going to implement the new National Education Policy for the next 5 years. It's not only about speaking about what we're going to do, but we have also gone ahead and inbuilt audit and accountability for each of the actions that we're going to do. And by the end of 5 years, we foresee that most of the recommendations of National Education Policy will be implemented in MAHE and will bear fruit as we go forward. This is our commitment and contribution to the country. I'm also overwhelmed to see positive responses in terms of students' enrollment in liberal arts at MAHE, European Studies, Indian Philosophy, and Sanskrit Studies. I hope these young minds make the best of the available time and resources, and I wish them to be the nation builders of tomorrow. Without further ado, I conclude this inaugural address of mine. It is an opportunity for our young aspirants to learn from the in-depth knowledge and experience of Dr. Debroy, a most renowned economist, an Indologist, and a scholar par excellence, who has worked with the Indian literature as well as its applications in the nation-building efforts. At the end, it's my pleasure to be part of such an orientation day, and I wish all the new entrants in the MAHE portals all the very best in your quest for academic excellence and all-round development in this world-class university. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Now it is the time to listen to Dr. Bibek Debroy, who would launch the Masters in Sanskrit Studies at Manipal in the presence of our Honorable Vice Chancellor by delivering the inaugural address. He is renowned for his some work in Sanskrit literary classics and his scholarship in economics. Thank you for accepting our humble invitation and joining us for this occasion, sir. At the outset, I would like to provide a brief introduction of our chief guest. Dr. Debroy is the chair of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. He is well known for his contributions to the game theory, legal and railway reforms, Indology and Sanskrit literature, among others. In 2015, he was awarded the Padma Shri, the fourth highest civilian honor in India, for his contributions to the field of economics, Sanskrit and Indology. Dr. Debroy was also awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by US-India Business Summit. He was awarded D.Litt Honoris Causa by KIIT University, DPhil by Amity University, DPhil and by Jagran Lake City University, and DS Honoris Causa by University of Engineering and Management. His notable works include the translation of the unabridged version of the Mahabharata into English, becoming only third person to achieve the feat. Dr. Debroy's translation of the Mahabharata was published in a series of 10 volumes, amounting to 2.25 million words. He has also translated the Bhagavad Gita, the Harivamsha, the Vedas, and Valmiki's Ramayana in 3 volumes. Along with Manmathanatha Dutt, he is the only second person to have translated both the Mahabharata and the Ramayana in unabridged form into English. his works are available in our library for the students and also are part of the curriculum on Indian ethics and epics. So we are very happy to have you, sir, here. However, we have short the time limit. I apologize for it, and we look forward to listen to you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Namaste. Jayatu Sanskritam, Jayatu Bharatam. Respected Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General Venkatesh, Professor Neeta Inamdar, Professor Srinivasa Acharya. Thank you for showing me the honor of inviting me to inaugurate what promises to be a very, very exciting program. I know it has been said that I and my office agreed very promptly, but I must confess that I agreed with some degree of reluctance. And the reason for the reluctance is, although I have been an academic for the most part of my life, I have stopped teaching for several years now. So I had my doubts about whether I was the right person to speak on a multidisciplinary approach to liberal arts in India, since I'm no longer associated, strictly speaking, with the field of education. Nonetheless, the Manipal Academy of Higher Education was very, very persuasive. So here I am. And therefore, I want to make some remarks. And they are slightly unstructured remarks. They're almost like random thoughts. There's a person named Herbert Simon. And Herbert Simon won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1978. His work was primarily in the area of human behavior, organizations, that kind of thing. There is a very, very minor paper that Herbert Simon wrote, very minor paper. And this was in the nature of an experiment. This experiment consisted of asking questions to students with different backgrounds. So there were students with different backgrounds, and they were given a set of questions, none of which had a right answer or a wrong answer. The entire experiment was designed to gauge the reactions of students. And I will give you an example of one such question. I realize this is a course in Sanskrit philosophy and European studies. So perhaps people are not that interested in mathematics, not even mathematics, arithmetic. So bear with me. So here is one of the questions that Herbert Simon administered for different groups of students. Now listen very carefully. I have a piece of stick. I have a stick. That stick is broken into two parts. So there is a stick. That stick is broken into two parts, so that one part is double the length of the other one. So the longer piece is double the length of the shorter one. Fair enough. But the shorter piece, and now listen carefully, the shorter piece is longer than the longer piece by 4 feet. So the shorter piece is longer than the longer piece by 4 feet. Question: what was the length of the original stick? I'm simplifying the reactions of students to the question. Students who had a mathematical background wrote down the equation, and it's a simple equation. They solved the equation and they said the length of the stick is minus 12 feet. Students who had backgrounds in engineering said the question must have been stated wrongly, and it must be that the longer piece is longer than the shorter piece by 4 feet. And Herbert Simon rationalizes, saying engineers are always used to working with imperfect data, so they're perfectly familiar with this situation of correcting data. So they corrected it and said the length of the stick must be 12. The question was also administered to people who had studied logic, students who had backgrounds in logic, and they generally said, here is proposition A, here is proposition B. The two propositions are mutually inconsistent, so therefore the problem cannot be solved. QED. Why have I decided to start with this example? The reason I've decided to start with this example is to illustrate to you the tendency of all of us to operate and think in the silos, in the little boxes that we have created. It's exceedingly difficult for us to work outside those boxes, outside those silos, which is the reason why something that is inherently multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, whatever you choose to call it, is so very important. By birth, mother tongue wise, I'm a Bengali, although I have not lived in West Bengal for a very, very long time. Most of you will be aware that there was something known as the Bengal Renaissance. It is difficult to precisely define the Bengal Renaissance and even to date it. People have dated it from Raja Ram Mohan Roy to Rabindranath Tagore's death. Most of that Bengal Renaissance was concentrated in the 19th century. Bengal, for example, produced the first two women graduates not only in India but in the entire British Empire, much before Oxford and Cambridge. Bengal produced the first master's degree holder lady in the entire British Empire, much before Oxford and Cambridge. What I, however, want to highlight, and this is a point that is sometimes not appreciated, is how multidisciplinary these individuals were in their interests. It is not just Rabindranath Tagore and Satyajit Ray who straddled their intellectual pursuits across a wide domain. There were countless others whose names non-Bengalis will not have heard of. The point is, the Bengal Renaissance may have happened, may have been triggered by an exposure to Western education, but the interests of these people covered every area of intellectual thinking that he could think of. To take an example, Ramesh Chandra Datta, because the Mahabharata was mentioned. Ramesh Chandra Datta was a civil servant, Indian civil service. But he translated abridged versions of the Mahabharata. He wrote novels in Bengali. And there was nothing exceptional about that. The great Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, who was a vice chancellor of Calcutta University, started his life as a mathematician, publishing papers on mathematics at a very early age. So the Bengal Renaissance, the defining characteristic of the Bengal Renaissance was its multidisciplinary nature. People were not constrained by these silos that I've mentioned. I'm an economist, so several of my friends and acquaintances are economists. I will not name them by name, existing economists. There's a famous economist, I will not name him. What else does he do other than being an economist? He paints saris by hand. There is another famous economist. What does he do? He's a classical vocalist. Remarkably good classical singer. So this mindset of the Bengal Renaissance of being multidisciplinary has been carried forward not by everyone, but by some individuals. And one of the points I want to make is, unlike the 19th century when this multidisciplinary nature of education was almost universal, today when an individual exhibits such a multidisciplinary tendency, it is more one of despite the system rather than because of the system. I did my graduation from Presidency College, Kolkata, in economics. In those days, the economics degree in the University of Kolkata was a BA, Bachelor's of Arts. Today it has become a BSc, a Bachelor in Science. And in those days, the system has not changed all that much. You studied what is called honors, that's your major subject, and you had subsidiary subjects which are known as minors. So obviously, I graduated in economics, so I did an honors course in economics. And what were my subsidiary subjects? My subsidiary subjects were English, Bengali, and mathematics. What did I want to study as a subsidiary subject? I wanted to study philosophy. Unfortunately, the rules did not allow me to study philosophy as a subsidiary subject. I have been reading a book which is a memoir, an autobiography that has been published by Acharya, who was India's chief economic advisor, the longest chief economic advisor that the government of India has ever had. And in that he describes his first meeting with Amartya Sen. So Shankaracharya meets Amartya Sen, and at that time, early 60s, Amartya Sen had published a paper in a journal called Mind, which is a journal devoted to philosophy. So Shankar describes his first meeting with Amartya Sen later, not in the early 60s, later. And Shankar says he went up to Amartya Sen and said, "Oh, I didn't know you were an economist. I thought you were a philosopher. Our sons went to study in the US immediately after school. And those of you who are familiar with the US system know that it's a 4-year course and you have majors and minors. And both of our sons became computer engineers, nothing to do with either with Sanskrit or with economics. They did their PhDs in computer engineering. But I was amazed to discover in the first 2 years, not in the third and the fourth year, in the first 2 years they had minors in things like films, in things like art appreciation, in things like literature, which our system borrowed from the Anglo-Saxon system, borrowed from the British system, just does not allow or has not allowed so far. In terms of a liberal education, in terms of the flexibility that is given to students, the US system, the way I understand it, having never been through it myself, is far more liberal in the kind of multidisciplinary access it gives students. In terms of not just attending courses that are credit courses, which are courses where you examine, but also courses that are audit courses, which you attend, but you're not examined in. In my own discipline of economics, economics has become more and more specialized. An older generation of economists had a much more broader understanding. So if you gave them a problem, an economic problem, should I do this? Should I not do this? They would approach that problem with a certain lens that they had, and they would give you an answer. Today's economists, especially the younger generation, know more and more about less and less. And less about more and more. So if you give them a problem, a certain economic problem, suppose the government is thinking of doing something, and you give them a certain problem, they'll say, oh, I don't know anything about it. That's not my specialization. Let me now turn to the issue of Sanskrit. And let me give you a few examples to illustrate why I believe a multidisciplinary approach should be brought to Sanskrit. I will give you 4 examples, and I will give you these 4 examples very, very quickly. After the Mahabharata, Harivansha, Valmiki, Ramayana translations, I am now in the business of translating the Puranas. Those of you who do not know, there are 18 Mahapuranas, Ashtadash Mahapuran, and my desire is to translate all of them in unabridged form into English. Out of these, 2 have been published. 2 are awaiting publication with Penguin because everything was delayed because of the pandemic. And I'm working on the 5th one right now. The 2 that have been published are the Bhagavad Puran and the Markandeya Puran. The 2 that are awaiting publication are the Vishnu Puran and the Brahma Puran. And I'm now about to complete the Shiva Puran. But let's come back to the example. There's a friend of mine, ex-journalist. He now works for the Observer Research Foundation. And he had picked up my translation of the Markandeya Puran. His name is Gautam Chikarni. So Gautam brings me up and says, you know what, I just read one particular page of your Markandeya Puran and I am thrilled. I said, why are you thrilled? This particular part of the Markandeya Puran states that the Earth's circumference is this much and the Earth's radius is this much. I repeat, the Earth's circumference is this much and the Earth's radius is this much. So Gautam said, immediately it occurred to me that if the Earth's circumference has been given, if the Earth's radius has been given, Implicitly, the Markandeya Puran is giving us a value of pi. And I looked at your footnote, and lo and behold, I found that you had given the deduced value of pi. If you left this to someone who's a pure Sanskrit scholar, someone who's a pure Indologist, this question about pi would not normally have occurred to him or her. The second example that I'm going to give you is when Bhishma is lying down on his bed of arrows and is teaching Yudhishthir and his brothers Rajadharma and other forms of dharma in Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva. And Bhishma is discussing the legal system. And Bhishma says, these are the most important kinds of civil cases which you must try in the order of priority. And on criminal cases, he says that if a wealthy person has committed a crime, he or she should not be imprisoned because it's at the cost of the public exchequer. Instead, the wealthy person who has committed a crime should be imposed a monetary penalty. It's only the relatively poor who should be imprisoned. Whether you agree with it or don't agree with it is beside the point. I'm giving you this example to illustrate that whether on the civil side or the criminal side, any lawyer would have been immediately interested. And this is not just the Mahabharata, there are similar statements in the Dharma Shastra texts also. Third example, in the Markandeya Puran, there is a demoness named Jataharini. Jataharini, as the name implies, steals newborn infants. So she steals an infant from house number A. There is house number B where there is another baby who's been born. She steals this infant from house number A, goes and replaces the infant in house number B with this one, takes away the infant from house number B and places it in house number C, and generally causes confusion. That's why she is called Jataharini. But in addition, what she does is she devours, she eats every third child. She devours, she eats every third child. Anyone who's interested in development will say, the Markandeya Puran is telling us that the infant mortality rate at that time, whatever be the time, was 333 per thousand, or 1/3. Again, a point that would not occur to a pure Sanskritist or Indologist, or might not. The fourth example I'm going to give you is about Vishnu's Matsya avatar. We all know the story about the Matsya avatar. Manu went to have a bath in the river, and there was this small fish. And he brought that fish home. It grew larger and larger. All of us know the story. The Puranas, by the way, they were clearly composed in different parts of the country. They were not necessarily composed in the same part of the country, at least in their final form. Question, what was this fish? If you look at the Puranas which were composed towards the south, the coastal regions, that fish is called a safari, which is a silvery white fish which is found in the sea. If I look at a Purana that was composed towards the east, that fish is a Rohita fish, which we familiarly know as a Rohu, freshwater fish. So again, it illustrates dietary preferences, socio-economic conditions in different parts of the country. Again, left to a Priya, Sanskritist or Indologist, the question would not occur. Today in economics, the word governance has become a buzzword. If I ask an economist friend, give me an example of an ancient text that talks about governance, most people will say Kautilya. And since Professor Shama Shastri discovered the manuscript and translated Kautilya's Arthashastra, particularly in recent years, a lot of economists have begun to investigate Kautilya's Arthashastra. But there are other Arthashastra texts also, which have not been examined by economists. And the reason for that is very simple, and it has to do with Sanskrit. People who are only interested in Sanskrit are generally bound down by the silos. And people who are interested in these things typically do not know Sanskrit. Which is again the reason why it is so very important for something like Manipal to start a course like this. Let's take Sanskrit as an example. Generally, I think Sanskrit is very badly taught. And I don't mean taught in institutions of higher education. It's very badly taught in schools. Let's leave that aside. A few years ago, a committee was set up to recommend changes in Sanskrit education. It was set up under the Narendra Modi government. The report is up there on the website somewhere. I happen to be a member of the committee. The long and the short of it is, Sanskrit, like any other language, is a bhasha. A bhasha is something that you speak. We learnt every language by speaking it, making mistakes, and then the mistakes were corrected. Sanskrit is not learned, just as English is not learned by memorizing Nesfield's grammar and Wren and Martin. Sanskrit is not learned by memorizing grammar tables. Today, thanks to Sanskrit Bharati, operating outside the formal system, there are all kinds of challenges with changing the formal system of education, but operating outside the formal system, largely thanks to Sanskrit Bharati, a lot of people are now learning Sanskrit. These are people who are professionally trained otherwise. Sanskrit is an add-on. And I think the function of liberal arts is to introduce Sanskrit as an add-on. In the so-called liberal arts, professional arts dichotomy, if there is one, there is always the question, is there a market for the liberal arts? And professional education generally tends to cater to the market. Let me state my proposition somewhat strongly. I find that many people who take to professional education, particularly engineers and doctors, that's what the market wants or has wanted. They are very narrow in their view of the world. Their curiosity is constrained by blinkers. The hallmark of all education and the hallmark of success to us as teachers is to encourage students to ask questions, the curiosity, which is the driving force of the Bengal Renaissance kind of thing that I mentioned. But the entire education system has been driven by the thrust, dares not to reason why, dares not to question, dares to mug and reproduce in the examination, the entire evaluation system. Ask yourself the following. What is the best geographical city which is a center for education anywhere in the world? I think many people will say Boston. There is Harvard, there is MIT, there is this, there is that. And ask yourself the question, why has Delhi not become this? There are so many universities, there are so many research institutions. And the answer is very simple. If I am in Boston, there is this collaboration amongst the institutions. If I'm a student, I can attend one course here, another course there. If I'm a researcher, I can do part of my research here, I can do part of my research there. In Delhi, it's impossible. They have their own silos. So today it is impossible for a student to do one course in Delhi University, another course in JNU, do a research project in ICRIER, another research project in NCER. It's just not possible. Now, all of this that I've just described, this silo system, defines the public education system. And that, I think, is the reason why it has so far been impossible to develop a multidisciplinary approach within the public education system. And if this multidisciplinary approach is going to be delivered, I personally think that the likelihood of that happening is much more through private institutions like Manipal. And I can think of a couple of other private institutions also. And indeed, reference has already been made several times to the national educational policy. The thrust of the national educational policy is indeed to encourage this multidisciplinary approach. And we have a timeline of 2030. And in some ways, what we are doing is, I've used the word Renaissance more than once. In some ways, this is the Renaissance of the entire education system. Getting away from something that we inherited as part of our colonial past, reinventing it, reinventing education in general, allowing students access to studying across disciplines, and in particular, in specific, reinventing liberal education. And I'm delighted that MAHE or Manipal is engaged in this exercise. Congratulations to all the students who have joined. I told you that I wanted to study philosophy. I wasn't allowed to. You have now the option of studying philosophy, Sanskrit, and European studies. Had it been several years ago, I would have been honored and happy had I been allowed to join a program like this. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Dr. Debroy. Thank you so much for that insightful lecture. And we are really grateful for receiving your views on liberal arts education in India. So my name is Tanima Nigam. I'm a lecturer at the Department of Philosophy, and I will be taking you through a small question answer. I have been reading your translations for quite some time, and even as a student, I have read your translation of the Mahabharata, and I have been quite curious about one of the things that you mentioned in your translation. So I think I'll seize this opportunity to perhaps pose my question first. There's something you said, how good for our mental health, the recently rising mental health awareness. How, as a translator, as a person who engages with these Indian literatures, would you say that reading the Mahabharata or any Indian literature could be helpful for us, in managing stress, anxiety, and other forms of mental health concerns?
Okay, I'll answer the question, but do realize that we have overshot the time limit. So we can't have open-ended questions. In fact, this should probably be the last question. I think it's difficult to answer that question because it is not just these texts, it is probably any text that talks about dharma. You mentioned mental peace. Most of the time, when we react to an issue and we are happy or unhappy, we react to something that is transient. It passes. Anything that makes us happy or unhappy in the conventional sense is something that passes. For example, perhaps when you were a child and some friend of yours possessed a toy, possessing that toy would have made you happy. Today, at this age, that toy is not going to make you happy. So, when we are reacting and we are asking questions about mental peace or lack of mental peace, we are typically reacting to things that are transitory and temporary. What these texts and any texts about dharma tell you is that these are temporary, forget the temporary and look for what is permanent. The second part is quite often when we define mental health or lack of mental health or happiness or misery, we are defining in terms of relationships with the external world. Relationship with the father, the parents, the mother, the son, the daughter, the spouse, the boss, the subordinate, possession of material objects, car, house. These are all extraneous, they are external. So tranquility, peace, and there can be no genuine happiness without peace. Tranquility and peace come from understanding. A, the message is inside you, the answer is inside you, not external. And B, focus on the permanent, not on the temporary.
Oh, okay. Perhaps, if possible, we'll just take one more question. There are two more questions in the chat box, but if possible, we'll just take one more question, if that's all right.
Yeah, just one more.
So it says, sir, in translations of classical literary texts, yes, okay, sir. In translations of classical literary texts, many a time, many of the concepts introduced in the recent times are also included. Do you feel that these texts of the past really have been able to predict the discussions of the present time?
Well, let me put it like this. Why am I translating? I'm translating because there are some people who can no longer read Sanskrit. And let's assume my translations are authentic. If someone is unhappy with my translations, that person will come along and do a better translation. So let's assume for the moment that my translations are authentic. Quite often we base our impressions about these texts on the basis of what we have heard. So and so has told us this, so and so has said that, I found this floating around on WhatsApp, I found this floating around on the net. My plea to everyone is please read the texts. First read the text, have the adequate information, instead of what many young people tend to do, which is to rely on information on the basis of WhatsApp forwards, Twitter messages, the net. Check the text for yourself and then ask your question. First, let's get the facts and then ask the question. If you can read Sanskrit, superb. If you cannot read Sanskrit, you need a translation. And if it is in English that you're looking for, that's the reason I'm translating.
Okay. I think with this we arrive at the conclusion of our question answer session. And since we are already pressed for time, I would like to invite my colleague, Ms. Priya, to conclude this event. Priya, over to you.
Thank you, Tanima. Professor Neeta, did you have something to say? I saw that you were unmuted. Ma'am, you're muted.
It's time already, so please conclude and on time.
Thank you very much. Here we are at the conclusion of this wonderful and equally significant session as we welcome the 14th batch of MA European Studies, the second batch of MA Indian Philosophy, and the very first batch of MA Sanskrit Studies. On behalf of Manipal Center for European Studies and the Department of Philosophy, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all who made this crucial event possible. First of all, a very big thank you to Dr. Bibek Debroy for accepting our invitation, taking your time out of your extremely busy schedule, and also sharing your thoughts on the importance of liberal arts and multidisciplinarity in today's time. Indeed, you have given us a lot of food to munch over and ensue discussions as we proceed with the academic year ahead. As a token of appreciation, we would also like to share a few copies of some books published by Manipal Universal Press, which I'm sure would be of interest to you. The books are Pramana Paddhati of Sri Jayatirtha, Critical Essays in Ramayana, Language of Logic, Navya Perspectives, Karkartha Prabodhini by Shivani, and Chaumasya Datta. These books, sir, will be posted to you. I hope you enjoy reading them. Thank you once again. I would also like to thank our Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, for sharing with all of us MAHE's vision and its commitment to promoting liberal arts education in the country. Sir, you have been a very important support pillar for all of us. Thank you very much. I would also like to extend my gratitude to our sister institutions, Department of Languages, headed by Mr. Rahul Putty, and Manipal Universal Press, headed by Arvind sir. Thank you, and for always being there with us. And of course, a very big thanks and once again a very warm welcome to all our dear students who begin their academic journey now. And I would also like to thank our senior batch students, both from the European Studies and Indian Philosophy, who have taken their time out to join us today to welcome their peers as we start their journey. And not to forget all our faculty members and staff who are part of Team EPL, that's European Studies, Philosophy and Languages, who have worked so hard since the past few weeks to bring us all together for this event today. Thank you once again and have a very, very good day ahead, a good weekend ahead. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Debroy. It was wonderful hearing you, listening to you. And
thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, sir.
thank you.